These Reddit stories aren't fiction. These are real-life accounts from survivors of cults that will send chills down your spine. For me, it was the moment I realized that the founder of my religion was exactly the same sort of guy who has started every other cult. Jim Jones, David Koresh, L. Ron Hubbard, and Joseph Smith Jr. All the same guy. The lies, the cons, the whole marrying teenage girls thing. Seriously, why does it always come to that? The give us your money, even if you can't pay your bills, dodging taxes, spiritual revelations that are always conveniently in line with whatever the leader wants/needs at the moment, the lying about church doctrine/history, etc., etc., etc. Once I realized that my church was founded by a cult leader, it became pretty obvious that my church was actually a cult, and I left. I think a good way to judge if it's a cult is how much it costs you to leave. From losing friends or loved ones, to literally paying them money, these are real giveaways. The church I went to as a kid, well, you just walk away and no one probably even notices. They didn't have any contact details for me or my parents or any idea where any of us worked. Former Jehovah's Witness here. Was in for about 7 years. I never heard the term high control group while I was in. I just knew that it felt like I was living in a fishbowl, being watched and judged for every little thing in my life. When I found myself policing my own thoughts for fear of some mysterious sky daddy hearing them, I knew this wasn't sustainable. Hope everyone here familiarizes themselves with the B-I-T-E model, so they know what to watch out for. I had been raised in a church that handled snakes and fell out in the spirit often. Being 6, I thought that snakes must be really cool if the pastor man was always handling them in church, so I got a snake plushie and brought it into the church for my Sunday school. I had the plushie ripped away from me and I was scolded about bringing the Devi into the church. I started questioning the doctrines almost instantly and was physically beaten over it at the house I grew up in, while being taught to use my body, yes, in that way, to bring people into the church. When I did become promiscuous but acted for myself and not bringing people into the church, the people in charge of caring for me threatened to once again kick me out. I finally called their bluff, ended locked out for a night, which I took as okay. This really is an unhealthy situation. I began to run away at 13. I managed to stay away from the house and the church for the next 5 years when I had to make some personal appearances to get my items that were being held hostage. Pretended to come back to the faith for a week while strategically moving everything I could grab of mine and run to a friend's couch. I kept up the couch surfing for the next 3 years and found my spouse when I was 21. I am still recovering from everything that happened, including the fact that I actually believed being touched, in those ways, was a holy thing. I was way too young. I ended up having to let go of everything, biological family, friends, the only supports I had. Still, I got myself out. Not a lot of other people can get out of the children of God. Knew a guy that was in the Church of Christ. He was a coworker. I went with him to one of their large gatherings. They passed communion around at one point, which I didn't take part in, and he was a little bit disappointed. I'm Lutheran and we don't take communion unless it's in a Lutheran church. This guy was so into this church, so religious. Imagine our surprise at work one day when they came in to press charges on him for theft. He had been stealing from the cash register. The rest of us there were talking amongst ourselves, pointing out how religious he was and was always on about how people should obey the commandments. A few months later I ran into him and we decided to go to lunch. He admitted to me that he had been stealing from the cash register because he had to keep up with his tithe at church. His reasoning for stealing is that giving to God was first and foremost and the money was going to the church. I tried to explain things a bit better to him about faith, etc., but he was too far gone. I often wonder what happened to him in the long run. Scientology works their members 80 hours a week for $50, and still calls them freeloaders and makes them pay an outrageous amount of money when they leave. I wasn't pulled in, but one attempted to recruit me. The worst part was afterwards when I had looked it up and realized that the person had been trying to pull me in. I tried telling my parents and they just, waved me off, like it wasn't important. I don't tell my parents important things these days. This is how you know the difference between a proper religion/church and a cult. A church says you're welcome anytime, any reason, and while they might encourage you to follow them, they won't be judgmental if you turn away. They want to help you and want you to see the way they do of your own volition. They want you to want to come back and be a part of their community. A church says come in. A cult on the other hand stifles your free will, tells you not to think for yourself, tells you they are your only salvation, and shames you if you speak out against them. And they make it impossible, or at least extremely difficult, to leave them and go your own way without them. A cult says never leave, no exceptions. When the religious organization my parents sent me openly said they were a cult, lol. They would be like, normally cults are nice things, but as usual media makes us look bad, or clapping is as bad as murder. I'm talking about normal clapping like you do at the end of a show. Their reasoning was it sounded like music, and music is devil's thingy, so you are devil basically. Oh, also graphic descriptions of a tale that goes like, there was a blacksmith who was blessed with being able to touch red hot iron without being burned. Then his wife opened the door to someone delivering something, but she was in a hurry so she couldn't put on her hijab properly. When she opened the door, the guy standing there saw literally one strand of her hair, and for some reason blacksmith lost his blessing without being informed. So he touched burning hot iron with his bare hands. Then they would proceed to tell us how a man seeing one strand of a woman's hair is the same as them having sex, which wasn't the lesson story was trying to teach, I guess, but whatever, just make shit up who is looking. The last straw was them not letting me go there after I was 13 if I wasn't gonna stay there whole year. I just stayed at summer. That's when I realized they couldn't brainwash me without constant supervision at that age. Oh, also I read pronunciation. I don't understand Arabic. The whole Quran at kindergarten before being able to read a letter in Latin alphabet. I always had the feeling something was off when my mom joined her new church. I became convinced of it when she forced me to join the youth group. Basically, there would be meetings every Saturday. Non-members would be divided into groups with 1 or 2 members as a guide, and they would have a weekly theme you would discuss in the group. The members would use this to assess if you were worthy of joining the youth group, and if you were, they would choose you to go to a weekend spiritual retreat they did as an initiation for new members that they were extremely secretly about and just referred to as the experience. Non-members weren't allowed to know what it was about. It was basically just a weekend-long violation of the Geneva Conventions. We were kept blindfolded for hours, sleep deprived, weren't allowed to know what time it was or even where we were. All the doors and gates were locked, had everything that wasn't clothes and basic toiletries taken away for the weekend. It legitimately felt like being held hostage. After that, youth group members were treated as free labor for whatever the church felt like it. Most of us were between 13 and 17 BTW, so child labor at that. The self-serving bastard who made up that whole recruitment and brainwashing system died alone in an ICU from C0V1D, unable to do anything for himself, which always brings me joy and comfort. Frigging fundamentalist evangelicals. I was raised by 2. They once left me in the care of an elderly church member when they went on a road trip in another country. The old lady put some old religious movie, maybe the 1978's The Rapture. All I remember is crying cause I was so scared, and her response was something like, "This is the truth. Even if it's scary, you need to be ready." I was like 4 years old. I had nightmares for years from that movie, and my parents were totally fine with her having showed it to me. They even almost asked her another time to sit me, but I begged them not to let her, so they found someone else. They also once played The Rapture in church and had all of the kids pulled out of Sunday school to watch it. Ugh. And that's just one of many horror stories I have. Funda evangelicals are the worst. I grew up in the LDS, Mormon, church. I've had some amazing and some terrible experiences in the church. I didn't lose faith in the teachings. What I lost faith in was the people. My father had several affairs, but my mom was blamed for divorcing him. A bishop actually screamed at me for my mother's bad attitude. So many of the members are hypocrites. I just couldn't stand it anymore. I now happily live as a Jack Mormon. Basically, I still believe and live by many of the teachings, but I refuse to step foot into a church ever again. I try and be a good person and treat everyone like I want to be treated. My wife is part of the Latter-day Saints Church, and she joined a women's club when we first moved into our new home, and she started going to a different church. It didn't last long. The women in that group were trying to convince them all that they needed to drop any non-members and only marry within that church. Taylor didn't go to another meeting and got so uncomfortable that she started driving 2 hours every Sunday to stay with the church she was originally at. I attended an event with her as a non-member, and they were all pretty rude to me. I think there was judgment about me being military as well. The original church were all fantastic. I have no issues attending an event with her as a non-member. I'm going on my 4th year as an ex-Mormon, and it's so surreal looking back. I swear it's a cult that lasted long enough to become a religion. Like, do some religions form organically with no ill intent? Sure. But Mormonism definitely was not that, and is a cult that evolved into a religion. Even more so when you glimpse into the fundamentalist side of the faith. Heck, don't even get me started on Mormon families like the Kingstons. Straight up mafia family right there. If they convince you theirs is the only way and that other methods are fake, that's a dead giveaway. Funny how submitting to the Holy Spirit so often includes the women having to sleep with the leader. Also, Mike Rinder describes life in the Sea Org in his book. It's amazing, and not in a good way. Not an actual cult, at least I don't think so, but I was really young, so who knows. It was a very well-known Christian school, grades K to 12. that I was forced to attend for 1 year, 5th grade, just because my brother wanted to go to high school there. Some of the scariest religious people I have ever met. Dresses had to be down to your ankles with no cleavage or shoulders showing. Shoes were flats, no sandals and no straps. Sneakers were allowed for P.E. only. You and your peers went to the bathroom at the same time and were monitored by your teacher. If you spent more than the allotted time in the bathroom, you got in trouble. Every single subject was slanted to discuss the Bible. I had a science report on the T-Rex that was docked points every single time I made a false claim about the dinosaur. And I'll never forget getting the paper back and seeing the question, "Where does the Bible say this?" written over every single scientific fact. Math class didn't exist. History class was only about the biblical locations and individual, though heavily kid-edited, people's stories. We attended church on Monday mornings. There is a church on the campus, till lunchtime. And if you got in trouble during church, you weren't allowed to eat any kind of girly stuff, like makeup, jewelry, fashion magazines, that was deemed immodest was confiscated, and the entire female population of the class was taken to an empty room and forced to sit through a degrading, accusatory lecture about how it was not the woman's place to pick her own appearance, how objects like nice clothes and jewelry and cute shoes would tempt the men, and if they hurt us it was our fault, how a woman's appearance was decided on by her husband, and how it was sinful to disobey what your man wanted. If you had special needs that were not physical, then you did not have special needs, you were just a difficult child who needed stronger discipline than your peers. Girls had to wear their dresses during P.E., and if you got it dirty or ripped or anything, you got in trouble. Getting in trouble was either a paddling or some kind of punishment that isolated you. For example, I spent too long in the bathroom and was shunned for the remainder of that class period. I stayed in the room, at my desk, but I was completely ignored by the teacher and all my peers. At the end of the class, my teacher walked up to me, smiled, and said, "You missed last class period. This affects your participation grade." I was forcefully saved. This was the incident where I remember I just shut down. Now, I was raised a Christian. Did the church on Sunday and Sunday school classes thing too. Also Bible camp in summer. My parents, however, had always told me that I shouldn't call myself saved until I understood my religion and felt moved by God to come to Him. Well, 5th grade me did not understand my religion to my satisfaction yet, so I did not consider myself saved yet. But I did believe I would get there. So about halfway into my 5th grade year, we had our mandatory Monday church service, and the pastor told everyone to close their eyes and requested that the students who were saved raise their hands. I did not raise mine. Upon returning to the classroom, my teacher pulled me aside and told me I could not return to class because we needed to talk. What followed was an hour and a half of standing in the hall by the classroom doorway with the door closed, getting alternately terrified and bullied into getting saved. I felt so pressured to do as I was told. It was scary. My teacher had made me miss lunch, a bathroom break, and 2 class periods by the time I just said the prayer to shut her up and get permission to use the bathroom. Bathroom permission was denied, and instead she walked me back into the classroom where every single student hugged me and welcomed me into the kingdom. Nothing ever felt so hollow, so unwanted, so anti-Christian to me as that experience. It felt wrong and very cult-like. I was deeply uncomfortable. That was the day I decided I was not returning to the school the next year. When I was studying to be a teacher, I did a placement at a non-denominational, Christian primary school that was 100% occult. Australia has a national curriculum that all schools are supposed to follow. This school followed it all right. The government wants us to teach you about evolution, but it's evil and not true. The scientists are lying to you very clearly, just hitting on the points of the lessons just enough to technically follow the curriculum. That was bad enough, but then they turned to me and were like, "Okay, your turn to brainwash the 10-year-olds into thinking everyone outside this school is lying to them." Needless to say, I declined and failed the placement. I had a dream where I was in a cult and sleeping in tents a few months before I actually did that. It was a déjà vu moment where a scene from my dream matched what I was doing at the time that made me stop and realize that I was in a cult. I also got kicked out of that cult for not buying into the bullshit self-help the leader was teaching us, especially the part where he was the Superman who brought us out of our dreary lives to give us better purpose and thus make us better people. One of my proudest achievements was shielding 2 younger girls from buying into that crap too. I got enticed there by a job, not knowing it was a cult. I do believe in a higher entity. She warned me about it beforehand. When I was about to finish college, I met a woman who invited me and my sister-in-law to a recruiting meeting for insurance. I went because my sil needed a job. I wasn't interested in selling insurance, not what I was going to college for either. We get there and it was a pyramid scheme, but the cultic was when the presenter was talking and other employees in the back were shouting out the answers like we were all supposed to know. At some point when they did that, the other people there, like us, were repeating the answers. It was creepy. The fake smiles they all had was just as creepy. I ran into a woman I'd gone to college with and she had the same creepy smile and talking about how she was so happy and making so much money, but it was an insurance MLM. How is that legal? She never looked that creepy in school. She had a genuine smile, but that day it was like she was on something so creepy. I never signed up and neither did my sil. She even said, "What was that?" when we left. My friend was in one. My mom was the one who told her family not to go there, but the thing that was the biggest sign was when a plane crashed, killing all leaders except one who became the new one leader. How strange, what a coincidence. She is now writing a memoir about it. I didn't know until I looked up the church to see many articles about it. It is Remnant Fellowship if anyone wants to look into it a bit more. I realized I was in a cult as a child at age 14. I grew up in a religious family of African descent. I'm Bandist. My grandmother was the head of the religion. Here we call her Yalarixa. Long before I was born. There was a time when I was younger that I couldn't even participate in the meetings and rituals. Despite being born into the religion with a grandmother who was a leader in it, I was never properly taught about the dogmas and rituals, but it was always expected that I would know everything. At 14, my grandmother was inducing me to be possessed by entities, and I had always expressed to her how much I was afraid of this because I understood that the Orishas and entities were very dangerous and powerful to deal with, and that I wasn't sure if it was something I wanted to be a part of. And there she was, inducing me to become incorporated with the entities. This type of thing is very heavy for a child to understand and deal with. She would get mad at me when I didn't want to participate because I had school the next day and was very tired. All my life I've seen people come and go from my grandmother's temple thousands of times. They would enter the temple, become her disciples, do very heavy rituals in a short space of time, and then leave the temple because they had a very bad fight with my grandmother, and after a while they would come back to attend. There is a woman who has done this at least 8 times. I have known her since I was very young. People use Umbanda a lot as a means of personal gain and do not understand what it is and how the demands of the entities can affect their lives, especially when they engage in such rituals lightly. Nowadays I have learned to live better with my belief in religion, but I no longer actively participate in the rituals or attend my grandmother's temple. Understanding that she had been forcing me to do these things since I was a child really messed with my head. I always was a very spiritual person. I mostly feel like my Orishas are taking care of me and guiding me through life, and they were the responsibles for my awakening. It wasn't exactly a cult, like we interacted with the outside world and stuff, but it still had the leader, follower mindset. It was set up to be a homeschool group, and it actually wasn't like a cult before COVID happened. But once we came back it changed. Instead of a school board it was just 3 people and a leader. I bet I would have stayed in that cult till I graduated if they didn't kick my family out for a stupid reason. Want to hear the reason? They kicked us out because my mom and I are close. Like what? Anyways, glad I'm out of that. I live in Italy and my best friend in elementary school, Ivan, was the son of a Mormon priest, pastor. I have to confess that I didn't think badly about Mormons for the longest time because they weren't strict with their son's interests. Ivan was really into Pokemon, Dragon Ball and the Lord of the Rings movies, like everyone else at the time, and his older brother was a huge Warhammer and D&D nerd. I discovered PC gaming through them and their parents didn't seem to have a problem with that. I ended up slowly losing contact with him after he moved, but I saw on Facebook that he went to South Africa as a missionary and he's married now. We're 30 now. I went to an Assembly of God church as a kid in the 90s. The pastor of the church had like 6 kids who weren't allowed to watch TV or celebrate Halloween. My mom completely bought into everything they told her and became a born-again Christian, which included getting baptized under them despite having already been baptized as a Methodist. My mom tried to keep me from anything fantasy or horror that wasn't specifically Christian, and defended a teacher who told me Harry Potter was satanic. Fortunately my dad did not drink that Kool-Aid. He pulled me and my sister out of that church in the first year and went to a Lutheran church with my dad while my mom continued going to the Assembly of God church. I don't go to any type of church anymore, but in my mind I still think of the Lutheran church as this wonderful, kind accepting place that saved me and my sister from the Assembly of God. Probably a little unfair, they didn't really do anything. It was my dad who pulled us out and took us to that church instead, but they were a breath of fresh air compared to the Assembly of God. That's a wrap. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more.